Not too long ago, I made a video talking about 4 things that I think Part 4 Diamond is Unbreakable does better than Part 5 Golden Wind, and one of the main points was that Part 4 has a tighter narrative. But having a tighter narrative doesn't automatically make it better, especially when Part 5 excels in other areas. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 6 things that Part 5 does better than Part 4, starting with an obvious one, which would be story momentum. In other words, the story pacing and high stakes. Due to Part 4 leaning too heavily on its slice of life nature, it had a lack of proper agency for most of the part and didn't shake things up at every turn. Not much was changing as the plot moved along, as the overarching goal was to protect Moriocho Town from bad guys who would likely turn out to be good afterwards, with Yoshikage Kira being the ultimate big bad in the second half. But even with Kira's introduction, it didn't really stop Part 4 from still having miniature arcs that felt like filler, as opposed to Part 5's overall plot being broken down and segmented into small individual goals, each with their own sense of urgency that caused a chain reaction over time to get to the main goal, which is for Jono to become the top mafioso. Araki also managed to add unpredictability to the story at every turn, making sure that it does a good job of shaking things up while raising the stakes with each mini arc. And usually when that said mini arc is over and done with, a new revelation in the plot is revealed, keeping things engaging and interesting. Another thing that Part 5 does better than Part 4 is basically having a better main cast of characters. Now don't get me wrong, I do love Part 4's main cast of characters. I love Koichi and his growth, I love Josuke for his charm and being a fun character, and also Rohan for his very weird quirks, and then there's Jotaro with his great ability to be a mentor to Josuke and Koichi, and there's also Okuyasu, but with Okuyasu he felt very underused and sidelined for most of the part. And I say this as someone who really enjoys his character as well. With Part 5's cast, however, it is consistently more engaging to me, and it didn't really feel like anyone was sidelined except for Fugo, but at the very least, he wasn't always on screen, so with him it wasn't as jarring to me like it was with Okuyasu. Also, even though he wasn't originally meant to just leave the story and never come back, as Araki did originally intend for him to be a traitor, his decision to leave the group and not betray Diavolo is realistic, and for his character it does make sense. Considering the kind of character he is and what he went through in his backstory, I do think that it makes sense that his arc would conclude in that way. But in regards to the other main cast of characters, they still make up for Fugo in a huge way. For example, we have Jono, who drives the story subtly, basically being a catalyst of growth in Bucciarati, and the others who each stand out in their own way as well in terms of just being very cool and fun. And then there's Trish, who is very essential as she shapes the many events of the story due to her connection with Diavolo being his daughter. Initially, she is introduced as a damsel in distress but with strong potential, which is later acted upon after Bucciarati and the others betray Diavolo, allowing her to develop as her own character and contribute more to the cast. Each character in Part 5's cast has great depth and chemistry with each other, thanks to the many dialogue and moments that we see on screen, but also their backstories as well, basically showing us the suffering that they went through in their own individual past lives, which makes the losses of characters like Narancia and Bucciarati feel really impactful. The next thing that Part 5 does better than Part 4 is character arcs. A good example would be Jono Giovanna. Now it's gonna sound crazy considering his reputation among this fandom, which is quite divisive, but people need to remember that Jono Giovanna is for the most part a static character like Josuke, who only really develops twice within the beginning of Part 4's story. Not saying that Josuke doesn't have a good character arc, but his isn't really anything special when you think about it. But with Jono, it is arguably more interesting, because the thing with Jono, he still technically grows as a character throughout Part 5, but his growth is very subtle, and basically his growth revolves around around him being forced to balance his Dio side and his Jonathan side, and Jono manages to tackle this issue. He later manages to be more authentic to himself and keep only the positive traits of both these two opposing personalities rather than discard one for the other, allowing him to later experience and better handle tougher situations in story while growing enough as a person to not only be worthy as the new leader of Passione, but also to be worthy of the Arrow's true power. And I think that's a really great story arc, and one that is very profound, and one that sadly doesn't get enough credit or is just overlooked and misunderstood by many people. So another great example is Bucciarati and how he's forced to transform from a cautious leader and family man into a more daring one. You also have Narancia, who matures by going from this very dumb kid who is, while still emotional, basically manages to later think for himself, problem solve, and fend for himself and the rest of his team. There is also Trish, who is forced to overcome her fears of her own father and being involved with the mafia, and even Abacchio, who went from being someone who was mentally held back by his past due to the society that rejected him and caused him to fail at his dream, only to go on and form new friendships despite his trust issues, which would later lead him to help his team and make a sacrifice that would allow his friends to eventually defeat the very man that was a indirect cause to his suffering in the first place. Even minor characters like Pesci and Doppio have character arcs where they grow in not only very meaningful but also unexpected ways as well. While part 4 does have notable character arcs like Yoshikage Kira's, Koichi's and Rohan's, part 5 just has more of them and of a higher caliber as well. Another thing that I think part 5 does better than part 4 is its themes. So like many other JoJo parts, part 4 focuses on the theme of fate, but it also focuses on the theme of community, bringing people together within this small town of Mario, whether it's to stop a common evil or just have someone that you can talk to and hang out with, which is a great theme to have considering you have a villain like Yoshikage Kira who doesn't care to be a part of any community, have people to talk to or to positively serve his small hometown in any way, as he just wants to instead use it to get what he wants, and that's to basically take the severed hands of women that he murders, which negatively affects the families of his hometown for his own selfish gain. So overall, the idea of community is a great theme for part 4. However, when it comes to the theme of fate in part 4, it is very basic, as the story paints it like fate is on Kira's side, and he'll even monologue about it sometimes as well. But like in any other prior part of JoJo's, our heroes will always have what it takes to overcome fate and take down the great evil that stand before them. But with part 5, its use of fate as a theme is more interesting, as it expands upon it while also having other themes around relationships, always prioritizing the journey over the end goal and overcoming the past as well, as we can see in each of their backstories and how they move within the story overall. Jono, Bruno and the others refuse to be held back by their past misfortunes and even fate itself, while also not taking any shortcuts along the way to reach their goals. Diavolo is the complete antithesis of all these themes, as he obsesses over erasing his past, and he also has the moral belief that only the end result matters, which is greatly shown in his King Crimson's ability to shortcut any result that he wants regardless of the cause. And unlike Kira, he doesn't just think that fate is on his side, but instead he thinks he has control over fate itself. He thinks he can control fate because he has possession of a stand that allows him to remain hidden and in power, when in actual fact it just allows him to run away from fate like a coward. Relationships in part 5 are also a central theme, because we see everyone have someone that they love or care about. Meanwhile, Diavolo is the only exception to this, but this is of course by choice, as Diavolo sees relationships as a burden, while everyone else in story either values them or sees them as a source of strength, and this goes even for the minor villains as well. Speaking of the minor villains, they are also stronger in part 5. Part 4's minor villains often become allies, which I think is really cool, but almost all of them end up not doing much of anything for the story, and they just get sidelined as a result, with 1 or 2 exceptions at best, not counting Rohan because he's a main character, and even the ones that don't become good, they're usually just very one-dimensional and forgettable, with Angelo being the only exception. In contrast, you have part 5's minor villains that basically have so much more character and personality to them, even with most of them not having that much screen time within the part. This goes for the members of the Squadra, who have a shared goal but with each of their own unique personalities and quirks that do stand out. And then you have Chocolata and Sekko, who have this weird love and hate relationship because of how depraved they are, while still managing to care for each other in their own way, which, yeah, again, still very twisted, but hey, it works, and it is a very enjoyable dynamic nonetheless. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about are the fights. So you all saw this coming. When it comes to the fights, part 5 just has part 4 beat on every level. When it comes to this, whether it be to do with higher stakes, basically being more creative and having more strategy involved. Part 5's fights are also better because of pacing, choreography, animation, music, sound design and dialogue. Not to mention that there are no fights in part 5 that feel like filler. Now, I'm not saying that most of the fights in part 4 are filler, but a few of them tend to feel that way, and a few of them really don't do a good job of moving the story forward in part 4, but with part 5 that is not the case. While part 4 does have the better final fight, part 5 still dominates when it comes to the rest of its fights, in terms of quantity and quality as well. But with all of that being said, those are the 6 things that I think Jojo's part 5 does better than part 4, but that's just me. What do you guys think? Let me know if you agree or disagree by dropping your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, then please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Jojo content. This is your boy MAMZYY signing out. Take care and peace.